What happens when Hollywood's most legendary actor faces off against daytime television's most controversial panel? You won't believe what unfolds when Harrison Ford sits down with the View host for what was supposed to be a light-hearted promotional appearance. This explosive confrontation will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews and the boundaries of respectful discourse. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The View promised to be a celebration of cinematic excellence as Harrison Ford arrived to promote his latest project. The 81-year-old icon, known for his roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones, entered the studio with his characteristic reserved demeanor, expecting the usual promotional questions about his career and upcoming films. What he encountered instead was a hostile environment that would test even his legendary patience. The trouble began almost immediately after Ford settled into his chair. Joy Behar, never one to shy away from controversy, opened with what seemed like an innocent question about Ford's thoughts on the current state of Hollywood. Harrison, you've been in this business for decades. What do you think about all these young actors today who seem to think they know everything about politics and social issues? Ford, maintaining his composure, responded diplomatically, "Well, I think every generation has something to contribute. Young people today are more informed and engaged than ever before." His answer was measured, clearly attempting to avoid any potential landmines in the conversation. But Whoopi Goldberg wasn't satisfied with diplomacy, leaning forward with an intensity that immediately shifted the room's energy. She pressed further. "Come on, Harrison. You can't tell me you don't have opinions about the way some of these celebrities use their platforms. I mean, you've always been pretty private about your political views, but surely you have thoughts about actors who constantly tweet about causes they barely understand." The camera captured Ford's subtle shift in posture, his jaw tightening slightly as he processed the loaded nature of the question. "I believe in the right of every person to express their views. Whoopi, that's what democracy is about. I may not agree with everyone, but I respect their right to speak." Sarah Haynes jumped in with what appeared to be support, but carried an underlying challenge. "That's very diplomatic, Harrison. But don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with fame? When you have millions of followers, shouldn't you be more careful about what you say?" Ford's response revealed the first crack in his diplomatic facade. "I think responsibility cuts both ways, Sarah. The media has a responsibility to report accurately, and talk show hosts have a responsibility to treat their guests with respect." The subtle emphasis on talk show hosts didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the studio. Sunny host, sensing an opportunity to push harder, leaned into the conversation with prosecutorial precision. "Speaking of responsibility, Harrison, you worked with some directors who have been accused of various things over the years. Roman Polanski, for instance. How do you reconcile working with people who have controversial pasts?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Ford's expression hardened noticeably. "I think it's important to separate art from the artist. Sonny, I've worked with hundreds of people over my career, and I can't be held responsible for every personal decision they've made in their private lives. But surely you have to draw a line somewhere." The host impressed, her voice taking on the tone she might use in a courtroom. "I mean, when you know someone has done terrible things, doesn't continuing to work with them send a message about what you're willing to tolerate?" Ford's patience was clearly wearing thin, but he maintained his composure. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex issue, Sonny. I've always tried to work with talented people who are professional on set. What they do in their personal lives is between them and the justice system." Her Joy Behar, not content to let the moment pass, added fuel to the fire. "Well, that's a very convenient position to take, Harrison. It allows you to work with whoever you want while avoiding any moral responsibility for their actions." The accusation of moral convenience clearly struck a nerve. Ford's voice carried a new edge as he responded, "I don't think it's convenient at all, Joy. I think it's realistic. If we start boycotting everyone who's ever made a mistake or been accused of something, we'll have no one left to work with." Whoopi, sensing that Ford was becoming defensive, decided to pivot to an even more provocative topic. "Let's talk about your environmental activism. Harrison, you've been very vocal about climate change, flying around the world to speak at conferences. but you also own several planes and have a significant carbon footprint. Don't you see the hypocrisy in that? Ford's response was immediate and sharp. I think calling it hypocrisy is unfair, Whoopi. I use my platform to raise awareness about important issues. And yes, sometimes that requires travel. But I also support numerous environmental organizations and try to offset my carbon footprint whenever possible. But actions speak louder than words, don't they? Bihar interjected with a smirk. I mean, you're telling people to reduce their carbon footprint while you're flying private jets around the world. That seems pretty hypocritical to me. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Ford's famous composure was beginning to crack as he realized this wasn't going to be the promotional interview he had expected. I think you're mischaracterizing my position, Joy. I've never told anyone to reduce their carbon footprint while ignoring my own. I've been transparent about my environmental impact and my efforts to address it. Sunny host, smelling blood in the water, decided to push even harder. But transparency doesn't necessarily equal action, does it, Harrison? You talk about offsetting your carbon footprint, but carbon offsets have been criticized as essentially meaningless. You're basically paying money to feel better about polluting. Ford's voice rose slightly, betraying his growing frustration. I think you're being deliberately obtuse, Sonny. Carbon offsets are one tool among many, and they're certainly better than doing nothing at all. Are they, though? Will they be challenged, or are they just a way for wealthy people to buy their way out of responsibility for their environmental impact? The attack felt coordinated now, with each host taking turns to chip away at Ford's composure. His response carried a warning edge that suggested his patience was running dangerously low. I think this line of questioning is becoming deliberately confrontational, and I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here. Sarah Haynes, perhaps sensing that things were escalating too quickly, attempted to redirect. Harrison, let's talk about your upcoming project. What can you tell us about? But Whoopi wasn't ready to let go. No, I think this is important. Harrison came here to promote his work, but he's also a public figure who takes political positions. That makes his consistency fair game for discussion. Ford's jaw clenched visibly as he processed the implied threat in Whoopi's words. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from promotional interview to something resembling an interrogation, and everyone present could feel the tension building toward an inevitable breaking point that would define this confrontation forever. The moment that would escalate everything beyond repair came when Joy Behar decided to push into even more personal territory. Harrison, let's talk about your marriages. You've been married 3 times. That's not exactly a great track record for someone who's always playing the hero on screen. What do you think that says about your ability to commit to anything long-term? The studio fell silent. Even the producers behind the cameras seemed to sense that a line had been crossed. Ford's eyes narrowed as he stared at Behar, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Excuse me, my personal relationships are none of your business, Joy. But Behar wasn't backing down. With a cruel smile, she continued, well, they become our business when you're sitting here lecturing people about responsibility and consistency. I mean, if you can't maintain a marriage, how can we trust your judgment on climate change or Hollywood ethics? The comparison was so outrageous, so deliberately provocative that Ford actually recoiled in his chair. That is completely inappropriate, Joy. My marriages have nothing to do with my environmental activism or my professional opinions. Whoopi, sensing that Ford was becoming genuinely angry, decided to pile on rather than de-escalate. But character matters, doesn't it, Harrison? You've built your career playing characters with strong moral codes. Indiana Jones, Han Solo, these are heroes, but in real life you seem to have trouble living up to those standards. For the first time, Ford's composure began to crack visibly. His voice rose as he responded, I never claim to be perfect. Whoopi, I'm a human being who has made mistakes just like everyone else, but attacking my personal relationships is completely out of line. Sunny host, emboldened by Ford's obvious distress, decided to twist the knife deeper. But that's exactly the point, Harrison. You present yourself as this moral authority, this environmental crusader. But when we look at your actual life, we see a pattern of inconsistency. Multiple marriages, environmental hypocrisy, working with controversial directors. It paints a picture of someone who says one thing but does another. The calculated nature of the attack was becoming clear to everyone watching. This wasn't journalism or even entertainment. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Ford's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he struggled to maintain his composure. I think you're deliberately mischaracterizing my life and my positions to create conflict where none should exist. Sarah Haynes, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly jumped in with what seemed like the most personally devastating question yet. Harrison, speaking of personal relationships, there have been rumors over the years about your behavior on set. Not anything criminal, but just being difficult to work with. Co-stars have described you as aloof, sometimes hostile. Is this the real Harrison Ford we're seeing right now? The question was designed to make Ford's current frustration seem like evidence of deeper character flaws. Ford's voice shook slightly as he responded. I think you're confusing professionalism with hostility, Sarah. I take my work seriously and I expect the same from others. If that makes me difficult, then so be it. Joy Behar laughed mockingly. Oh, so now we're all supposed to admire your professionalism. The same professionalism that led you to work with directors who abuse their power. The same professionalism that has you flying around the world in private jets while telling others to save the planet. Ford's patience was hanging by a thread. I think you're being deliberately dense, Joy. I've explained my positions clearly and you're choosing to misinterpret them for your own purposes. Our own purposes. Whoopi interjected with feigned innocence. Harrison, we're just asking questions. If you can't handle basic scrutiny of your public positions, maybe you shouldn't be taking those positions in the first place. The gaslighting was transparent but effective. Ford was being painted as unreasonable for objecting to personal attacks disguised as journalism. His voice carried a warning tone as he responded. There's a difference between scrutiny and personal attacks. Whoopi, what you're doing right now is the latter. Sunny host, sensing that Ford was close to his breaking point, decided to push him over the edge. Personal attacks, Harrison. Everything we've discussed is part of the public record. Your marriages, your environmental activism, your work relationships. If you don't want these things discussed, maybe you shouldn't be a public figure. The victim blaming was so blatant that Ford actually stood up slightly in his chair. I agreed to come here to talk about my work, not to be psychoanalyzed by people who don't know me. But we do know you, Harrison, Joy Behar said with a poisonous smile. We know you from your public statements, your public actions, your public failures. And what we see is someone who talks a good game but can't live up to his own standards. Ford's voice was now clearly strained with anger. I think this interview is over, but Whoopi wasn't about to let him leave on his own terms. Oh, so now you're going to run away just like you ran away from your first 2 marriages, just like you run away from accountability for your environmental impact. The comparison was so inflammatory that Ford's face flushed with genuine anger. I'm not running away from anything, Whoopi. I'm choosing not to participate in a character assassination disguised as an interview. Sarah Haynes, perhaps realizing that things had gone too far, made a weak attempt to salvage the situation. Harrison, I think maybe we've gotten off track here. Let's talk about your new project. But Ford was no longer interested in salvaging anything. No, Sarah. I think we've revealed exactly what this was always intended to be. This wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. Sunny host, unable to resist one final provocation, delivered what would become the final straw. An ambush. Harrison, you're a public figure who makes millions of dollars trading on your reputation. That reputation is fair game for examination. If you can't handle that, maybe you should find a different career. The suggestion that Ford, after 5 decades in Hollywood, should find a different career was so insulting that something fundamental shifted in his demeanor. His voice dropped to a level that everyone in the studio could recognize as dangerous. I think you've forgotten who you're talking to, Sunny. Joy Behar, apparently unable to read the room or simply not caring, decided to push even harder. Oh, are we supposed to be intimidated by Harrison Ford, the guy who can't keep a marriage together and lectures us about the environment while flying around in private jets? Please. The mockery in her voice was unmistakable, and Ford's response carried a finality that suggested the confrontation was about to reach its climax. I think this conversation is over. But Whoopi wasn't finished. The conversation is over when we say it's over, Harrison. You agreed to be here, and you'll stay until we're done. The authoritarian tone in her voice was the catalyst that would finally push him beyond his breaking point. setting the stage for the explosive finale that would define this confrontation and create one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. Ford's transformation was immediate and shocking. The reserved, diplomatic persona that had defined his public appearances for decades completely evaporated. He stood up from his chair with such force that it rolled backward, his eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded everyone why he had been so convincing playing action heroes. "You'll decide when I'm done. Who the hell do you think you are, Whoopi?" The studio fell into stunned silence. This wasn't the Harrison Ford that audiences knew. This was raw, unfiltered anger from a man who had been pushed far beyond his limits. Whoopi, clearly taken aback by the sudden shift in Ford's demeanor, tried to regain control. "Harrison, please sit down. We're in the middle of—" "No." Ford's voice boomed across the studio with such force that several crew members visibly flinched. "I'm done with this charade. I'm done with all of you." He turned to face each host individually as he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Joy, you think attacking my personal relationships makes you some kind of journalist. It makes you a bully. Nothing more." Bahar, clearly rattled by Ford's sudden aggression, tried to defend herself. "Harrison, we were just what? Just doing your job." Ford's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Your job is to entertain people, not to destroy them. But you've forgotten that, haven't you? You've become so addicted to controversy that you'll attack anyone who sits in that chair." He turned to Sunny Host, his expression darkening further. "And you, Sunny, you use your legal background to make personal attacks sound like cross-examinations. You think that makes you clever. It makes you pathetic." Host tried to interject. "Harrison, if I would just what? Sit here and let you tear apart my life for your entertainment." Ford's voice was rising with each word. "I've been in this business for 50 years, and I've never been treated with such disrespect. Never." Sarah Haynes, clearly desperate to salvage something from the situation, made a final attempt at reconciliation. "Harrison, maybe we can start over. I think there's been a misunderstanding." Ford's response was immediate and devastating. "There's been no misunderstanding, Sarah. This was exactly what you all intended. You brought me here under false pretenses and then you ambushed me. Well, congratulations. You got your confrontation." The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the producers seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation continue. Ford began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled despite his obvious anger. "You know what the real tragedy is? I actually respect what this show used to represent, a platform for women's voices, intelligent discussion about important issues. But you've turned it into a gladiator arena." Whoopi, perhaps realizing that the situation had spiraled completely out of control, made one final attempt to assert authority. "Harrison, you're overreacting. We ask tough questions of all our guests. That's what we do." Ford's response was swift and merciless. "Tough questions, Whoopi. You asked me about my marriages like they were criminal acts. You attacked my environmental activism by calling me a hypocrite. You questioned my character, my integrity, my career. Those aren't tough questions. They're character assassination." He finished removing his microphone and placed it on the table with deliberate precision. "And the worst part, you did it all while pretending to be victims yourselves. Oh, we're just asking questions. Oh, he can't handle basic scrutiny. Your bullies hiding behind the facade of journalism." The Joy Bahar, perhaps unable to resist one final provocation, made the mistake of speaking up. "Harrison, if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen." Ford's interruption was sharp and final. "Joy, I've been in this kitchen a lot longer than you have. I've handled more heat than you can imagine. But there's a difference between heat and poison, and that's what you're serving here." He began walking toward the edge of the set, his movements controlled but purposeful. The cameras followed him, capturing every moment of his exit. "You want to know what I think about the current state of Hollywood? I think shows like this are what's wrong with it. You've turned discourse into blood sport, and you've forgotten that there are real people behind these public personas." Sunny Host, in what would prove to be the final exchange, called out Harrison. "You're making a mistake. This will follow you." Ford stopped and turned back to face her, his expression cold and final. "No, Sunny. The mistake was coming here in the first place. And the only thing that will follow me is the knowledge that I finally stood up to bullies who have been hiding behind their platform for too long." He continued walking, But as he reached the edge of the set, he turned back one final time to address the cameras directly. "To anyone watching this, I want you to understand something. I came here to talk about my work, to share stories from my career, to connect with fans who have supported me for decades. Instead, I was subjected to a coordinated attack designed to humiliate me for entertainment value." His voice carried a weight of finality that made it clear this wasn't just about one interview. This is what passes for journalism today. Personal attacks disguised as tough questions. Character assassination disguised as accountability. And when you object, you're told you can't handle the heat. The studio remained in stunned silence as Ford delivered his final words. "Well, I can handle the heat. What I can't handle is being treated with such fundamental disrespect by people who should know better. The View used to be better than this. You used to be better than this." With that, Harrison Ford walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a studio full of stunned hosts and crew members who had just witnessed one of the most dramatic guest exits in daytime television history. The cameras continued rolling as the hosts sat in uncomfortable silence, clearly unsure how to respond to the complete destruction of their carefully crafted ambush. Whoopi eventually attempted to regain control, calling for a commercial break, but the damage was done. Ford had exposed the show's tactics for what they really were, and he had done it with a dignity and force that reminded everyone why he had been one of Hollywood's most respected figures for 5 decades. The confrontation was over, but its impact would reverberate far beyond the studio walls, serving as a powerful reminder that even the most patient and professional individuals have limits, and that crossing those limits can have consequences that extend far beyond a single interview. Harrison Ford had drawn a line in the sand, and in doing so, he had created a moment that would define not just his appearance on The View, but the very nature of celebrity interviews in the modern media landscape.